Pay attention to the woman in the grey wool coat, the one with the blue scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. Her name is Sarah Jenkins. The security camera footage is grainy, time-stamped in the corner with stark white digital numbers. October 26th, 7:15 a.m. She is walking with a purpose that is familiar to anyone who has ever had a morning routine. Her path is the same one she has taken nearly every weekday for the last 6 years. It is a path of comfortable repetition, a small ritual in a life defined by creativity and order. She has no idea that she is also walking a timeline. She has less than 20 minutes to live the life she has always known. After that, nothing will ever be the same. This is not just a story about a crime that was planned. This is a story about the thousands of tiny, invisible threads that connect us to the people we see every day, the strangers who know our coffee order, but not our last name. It is a story about how one of those threads, pulled at just the right moment, can stop a monster in his tracks. And it is a cautionary tale about the terrifyingly thin veil between a normal life and a waking nightmare. To understand what was about to happen to Sarah Jenkins, you first have to understand who she was. At 28 years old, Sarah was a person who found beauty in structure. As a senior graphic designer for a boutique marketing firm, her job was to create harmony out of chaos, to arrange pixels and palettes into something that made sense, something that was pleasing to the eye. Her apartment reflected this philosophy. It was a small but meticulously organized space, with books arranged by color on the shelves and pens sorted by type in a ceramic holder on her desk. This wasn't coldness. It was a form of self-care. In a world that often felt loud and unpredictable, Sarah's routines were her sanctuary. Her morning coffee was the cornerstone of this daily ritual. Every weekday, she would walk the 6 blocks from her apartment to The Daily Grind, a small, independent coffee shop with worn wooden floors and the constant, comforting scent of roasted beans. For 2,190 days, minus weekends and the occasional vacation, her order was the same: a large almond milk latte, 1 shot of vanilla, extra hot, to go. She was a beloved regular, the kind of customer who knew the baristas by name, who asked about their classes or their kids, who always left a generous tip in the jar. She was a bright spot in their morning rush, a moment of predictable pleasantness. But recently, a shadow had fallen over Sarah's structured life. Her vulnerability came in the form of a man named Mark Renshaw. They had met a year and a half earlier through a mutual friend. On the surface, Mark was the perfect partner. He was 31, a successful software engineer with a quick smile and an easy confidence that Sarah initially found magnetic. He was attentive, bringing her flowers for no reason, planning elaborate dates, and listening intently when she talked about her design projects. For the first 6 months, it was wonderful. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the attentiveness began to curdle into something else. It became control. He started questioning her nights out with friends. He would text her constantly when they were apart, growing agitated if she didn't reply within minutes. He would offer suggestions on her clothing, her friendships, even her career path, framing his suffocating opinions as loving concern. Sarah, a deeply independent person, began to feel like the walls were closing in. The breaking point came 2 months before that October morning. She had won a prestigious design award at work, and her firm threw a small party to celebrate. Mark, who had initially seemed happy for her, spent the entire evening sulking. Later, he confessed he was angry that she was the center of attention, that her success somehow made him feel diminished. It was in that moment that Sarah saw the relationship for what it was, not a partnership, but a cage. She ended it the next day. And that is when the monster hiding in plain sight began to show his face. Mark Renshaw did not accept the breakup. To the outside world, he remained the same person. His colleagues at the tech firm where he worked saw him as a reliable, if quiet, team player. His neighbors in his upscale apartment building would describe him as polite, someone who always held the elevator door. He was average. He was normal. He was completely unremarkable. Wrong. Beneath that placid surface, a dangerous obsession was festering. His first tactic was pleading. He sent dozens of text messages a day. "I can change, Sarah. I know I was wrong. Please just give me one more chance." When she didn't respond, the pleading turned to anger. "After everything I did for you, you just throw it away? You're so ungrateful. You'll regret this." Then came the unwanted appearances. He showed up at her office with a massive bouquet of roses, causing a scene in the lobby until security escorted him out. He waited by her car in the parking garage after her yoga class. He even bumped into her at her regular grocery store, his cart filled with her favorite foods, a pathetic and transparent performance of longing. Each encounter left Sarah more and more unsettled. She blocked his number, but he started emailing from different accounts. She made her social media profiles private, but he tried to friend her colleagues to keep tabs on her. A week before that fateful October morning, she had walked into her local police precinct to file a report. She sat in a hard plastic chair and explained the escalating harassment to an officer who seemed more bored than concerned. He took her statement, but offered little reassurance. "Look," he had said, sighing, "it's a breakup. He's emotional. He hasn't technically threatened you. Just try to ignore him. He'll get tired and move on." This was the systemic failure, the dismissal of a woman's intuition, the bureaucratic shrug at the bright red flags of possessive behavior. The officer could not have known, of course, what was happening inside Mark Renshaw's quiet, respectable apartment. He couldn't have known about the digital life that unmasked the man. Mark's computer was a roadmap to his dark intentions. His search history from the weeks following the breakup was a chilling litany of premeditated violence. How to track someone's location with their phone. By unregistered GPS tracker. Hardware store near me selling zip ties, rope, duct tape. Effects of chloroform on humans. Fastest acting sedative. He had spent hours on Google Maps, studying remote areas, looking for isolated cabins or abandoned buildings within a 2-hour drive of the city. He had downloaded a soundproofing guide and bookmarked web pages selling industrial-grade acoustic foam. He had created a document on his laptop titled The Project. It was not a journal of heartbreak. It was a business plan for an abduction. It detailed Sarah's daily routine with terrifying accuracy, noting the exact time she left for work, her route to the coffee shop, and the average time she spent inside. He had been watching her for weeks. The plan was methodical. It was cold, and it was set for October 26th. The timeline to their violent intersection began at dawn. At 6 a.m., Mark Renshaw was already awake. He did not go for a run or make breakfast. He went to his garage and opened the trunk of his dark blue sedan. Inside was a large duffel bag he had packed the night before. He checked the contents methodically. A roll of silver duct tape, a package of heavy-duty zip ties, a coil of nylon rope, a small bottle of industrial-grade solvent, and a set of latex gloves. He moved with a calm efficiency that was utterly devoid of rage or passion. This was not a crime of impulse. It was a task to be completed. At 6:45 a.m., he drove his car not toward his office, but toward Sarah's neighborhood. He parked on a side street 1 block away from the daily grind, in a spot that gave him a clear view of the coffee shop's entrance. Then he waited. At 7:05 a.m., Sarah Jenkins's alarm clock went off. She went through her morning routine with the same comforting rhythm as always. She showered, dressed in her work clothes, and put on the grey wool coat and blue scarf. She was feeling a little better that week. Mark hadn't tried to contact her in 3 days, and she allowed herself a flicker of hope that he had finally, as the police officer predicted, moved on. She felt a lightness in her step that had been missing for weeks. At 7:15 a.m., she locked the door to her apartment and started her 6-block walk. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the street was filled with the usual morning commuters. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. At 7:21 a.m., she arrived at the daily grind. As she pushed open the heavy wooden door, the bell above it jingled, announcing her arrival. Behind the counter was Josie, a young woman with bright purple hair and a perpetually cheerful demeanor. Josie had been working the morning shift for 3 years. She had served Sarah Jenkins her almond milk latte at least 700 times. "The usual, Sarah?" Josie called out, already reaching for the almond milk. "You know it, Josie," Sarah replied with a smile. As Josie prepared the drink, Sarah stood by the pickup counter, scrolling through emails on her phone. It was in that moment, as she glanced up and out the large front window, that she saw it. The dark blue sedan, and behind the wheel, the unmistakable silhouette of Mark Renshaw. A cold dread washed over her, instantly erasing the morning's fleeting optimism. He was here. He hadn't moved on. He was waiting for her. Her heart began to pound in her chest, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Her plan was to grab her coffee and walk out, just like any other day. But now, the short walk from the door to the safety of the crowded main street felt like a mile-long gauntlet. What was he planning? Would he confront her, make another scene, or something worse? The convergence was complete. All the pieces of Mark's meticulous plan were in place. He watched her through the window, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His plan, as detailed in his project document, was simple and brutal. He would wait for her to exit the coffee shop, cup in hand. In the brief, distracted moment it took for her to adjust her grip or take a first sip, he would get out of his car, close the distance in seconds, and grab her. He was stronger than her. He would clamp a hand over her mouth and drag her to the passenger side of his car, the door already unlocked. He would force her inside and use the zip ties he had placed on the passenger seat to restrain her hands and feet. It would take less than 30 seconds. In the morning rush, with people focused on their own destinations, he gambled that no one would notice until it was too late. Once she was in the car, the rest of his plan would unfold. The chloroform, the drive to the isolated, pre-scouted location, the beginning of a new, horrific chapter of her life, entirely under his control. Josie finished the latte. She capped the paper cup, slid it into a cardboard sleeve, and placed it on the counter. "Large almond milk latte for Sarah," she called out, a phrase she had uttered hundreds of times. But as she looked up, she saw that Sarah wasn't looking at the cup. She was staring out the window, her face pale, her posture rigid with fear. Josie followed her gaze. She saw the blue car parked across the street, and she saw the man inside, staring intently at their storefront. Josie was not a detective. She was a 22-year-old art student paying her bills by making coffee. But she was observant. She had seen this man before. He had been parked in that same spot twice in the last week. She hadn't thought much of it then, but now, seeing the look on Sarah's face, a powerful instinct kicked in. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The alarm bells weren't just ringing in Sarah's head anymore. They were ringing in Josie's. Sarah reached for the cup, her hand trembling slightly. This was the moment Mark was waiting for. He saw her hand move toward the cup. His own hand moved to the door handle of his car. But then something happened that was not in his plan. Josie the barista made a decision. Acting on pure instinct, she pulled the paper cup back from the counter just as Sarah's fingers were about to touch it. "You know what?" Josie said, her voice a mask of casual apology. "I think I burned the milk on this one." My bad. Let me make you a fresh one. It's on me." Sarah looked at her, confused. "Oh, no, it's fine. I'm sure it's—" "Nope," Josie interrupted, already turning to dump the perfectly good latte into the sink. "I can't let my best customer go out with a bad coffee. It'll be just a minute. Why don't you have a seat over there?" She gestured toward a small table in the corner, far from the front window. As she did, she made eye contact with Sarah, a quick, sharp look that conveyed a message words could not. "I see it too. Stay here. You are not alone." Understanding dawned on Sarah's face, followed by a wave of profound relief. She nodded mutely and walked to the table, her legs feeling weak. She was no longer on the timeline. Josie's simple, decisive action had completely derailed Mark's plan. His entire strategy hinged on the predictability of Sarah's routine. Grab the coffee, walk out the door. But now she was sitting down. She was staying. Across the street, Mark watched this unfold, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. This was not supposed to happen. His precise calculation was thrown off by an unpredictable variable: the barista. He watched for another minute, then two. Frustration morphed into rage. His window of opportunity, the brief, vulnerable transition from inside to outside, was gone. He couldn't go into the coffee shop. It was full of witnesses. He couldn't wait indefinitely. His car was becoming conspicuous. With a curse, he slammed the car into drive and peeled away from the curb, his tires squealing in protest. His cover was blown. His plan was a failure. Inside the coffee shop, Josie watched the car disappear down the street. She took a deep, shuddering breath, then scribbled something on a napkin. The license plate number. She walked over to Sarah's table, a new steaming for here mug in her hand. She didn't remake the drink. It was the same one from before. "He's gone," Josie said softly, placing the mug on the table. Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and gratitude. "How did you know?" she whispered. "I didn't," Josie said, pulling up a chair. "Not for sure. But the look on your face. And I'd seen his car before. My gut just screamed at me. Are you okay?" Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. She told Josie everything. The breakup, the harassment, the feeling of being watched, the dismissive police officer. Josie listened, her cheerful demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. "Okay," she said, when Sarah finished. "We're calling the police again, right now. And this time, they're going to listen." She was right. The call was different this time. It was not a vague complaint about a bothersome ex-boyfriend. It was a report from a third-party witness about a specific man, in a specific vehicle, exhibiting menacing behavior that visibly terrified another person. And they had a license plate. 2 officers arrived at the coffee shop within 15 minutes. This time, there was no boredom, no dismissive sighs. They listened to Sarah's story, now corroborated by Josie's calm, factual account. They saw Sarah's genuine fear. They ran the plate number. It came back to Mark Renshaw. When they cross-referenced his name in their system, they found Sarah's harassment report from the previous week. The initial police response had been a failure, but Josie's intervention had created a new, undeniable set of facts. It was the breakthrough. The investigation began in earnest. Detectives were dispatched to Mark Renshaw's apartment. They found him there, and he agreed to come to the station for questioning. He was the picture of a grieved innocence. The interrogation, which lasted for 4 hours, was a masterclass in deflection and manipulation. He claimed he was just driving through the neighborhood on his way to a meeting that had been cancelled at the last minute. "Was I near the coffee shop?" "Maybe. It's a public street," he said with a shrug. He painted Sarah as emotionally unstable, someone who was overreacting to a difficult breakup. "I still care about her," he claimed, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I worry about her. That's all this is." But his story began to crumble under scrutiny. He couldn't name the client he was supposedly meeting. He couldn't explain why cell phone tower data showed his phone had been stationary in that 1-block radius for over 45 minutes. His lies were transparent, but they were still just lies. The detectives knew they needed more than a suspicious story. They needed physical evidence of his intent. Based on the combination of Sarah's prior report, Josie's witness statement, and Mark's suspicious behavior and inconsistent answers, they were able to obtain a search warrant for his vehicle and his apartment. What they found turned a stalking case into a case of attempted kidnapping. The search of his car was the first domino to fall. Tucked away in the trunk, inside a black canvas duffel bag, was the kit. The roll of duct tape, the pre-cut lengths of rope, the industrial zip ties, the latex gloves. A detective, holding up the bag, remarked that it looked like something out of a serial killer movie. But the most damning discovery was on the front passenger side floor mat. A small amber glass bottle had rolled partially under the seat. The label was in a foreign language, but the chemical formula was universal. It was chloroform. The search of his apartment was even more chilling. On his desk, his laptop was open. Forensic technicians would later recover the search history, the Google Maps routes to desolate locations, and the project file that laid out his entire abduction plan in cold, clinical detail. They found receipts for the rope and tape, purchased with cash from a hardware store 50 miles away 2 weeks earlier. They found a printed-out satellite image of a dilapidated barn in a neighboring state, with handwritten notes in the margins. No nearby homes. Poor cell reception. There was no discovery of a body. No need for an autopsy. The evidence was of a different kind. It was the anatomy of a crime that had been stopped at the last possible second. It was a blueprint for a murder that never happened. The science of justice, in this case, was digital and psychological. The evidence proved not what he had done, but what he was about to do. Faced with the contents of his car and computer, Mark Renshaw's calm facade finally cracked. He stopped talking and asked for a lawyer. The trial of Mark Renshaw began 6 months later. He was charged with attempted kidnapping, stalking, and possession of kidnapping tools. His defense attorney argued that it was all a fantasy. They claimed Mark was a heartbroken man who had retreated into a dark but harmless world of fiction to cope with his grief. The project file, they argued, was not a plan, but a story, a way for him to process his emotions. The items in his car were, they claimed, a collection of unrelated objects. The rope for a camping trip he never took, the tape for home repairs, the chloroform, a bizarre online purchase he regretted. The prosecution methodically dismantled this defense piece by damning piece. The key testimony came from Josie, the barista. On the stand, she was calm and clear. She recounted seeing Mark's car on previous days. She described the look of pure terror on Sarah's face. And she explained the split-second decision that changed everything. "Why did you do it?" the prosecutor asked. "Why did you take the coffee back?" Josie looked at the jury. "Because you can tell when something is wrong," she said. There was a predator and prey feeling in the air. I couldn't just hand her coffee and send her out the door to whatever he had planned. I just couldn't. Sarah's testimony was powerful. She detailed the months of control and the weeks of escalating harassment, her voice trembling but steady. She described the profound fear she felt when she saw him waiting for her, a fear that was vindicated by the evidence later found by police. The digital forensics expert walked the jury through Mark's search history, displaying the chilling queries on a large screen for the entire courtroom to see. There was an audible gasp from the jury box when the search for how to soundproof a basement appeared on the screen. It took the jury less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, Sarah Jenkins collapsed into the arms of her parents, weeping with relief. Across the room, Mark Renshaw stared straight ahead, his face a blank mask. He showed no remorse, no emotion at all. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, the maximum allowed by law. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, spoke directly to him. "Your detailed planning," he said, "reveals a profound coldness of heart and a terrifying capacity for violence. Society is fortunate that on the morning of October 26th, your meticulous plan was undone by the simple, humane observation of a stranger." This story circled back to the theme established in those first few moments of grainy footage. It is a story about the power of paying attention. The system failed Sarah Jenkins when it dismissed her initial, valid fears. It is a failure that happens all too often. Stalking and obsessive behavior are not romantic dramas. They are indicators of potential violence. They are the warning signs of a fire before it becomes an inferno. But where the system failed, a community succeeded. That community was just one person. A barista who knew a customer's routine, who trusted her own instincts, and who chose to act. The human cost, however, remains. Sarah Jenkins was physically unharmed, but the psychological scars are deep. She lives with the terrifying knowledge of what almost happened, the ghost of a life she was nearly forced to live. She no longer walks to the coffee shop. She moved to a new apartment in a new neighborhood. She has a new routine. Her sense of safety in the world, the comfortable predictability she once cherished, has been shattered. It is a life sentence of a different kind. So this is the final warning. This is the moral of the story. Trust your instincts. If you feel you are in danger, you probably are. Do not let anyone tell you that you are overreacting. And more than that, look out for each other. Pay attention to the people around you, to the subtle signs that something is wrong. You do not need to be a hero. You do not need to intervene in a way that puts you in danger. But you can be a witness. You can make a phone call. You can ask someone if they are okay. You can, like Josie, change the routine. Because sometimes the simple act of changing a coffee order from to go to for here is the difference between life and a fate too horrible to imagine. It is the thread that unravels the monster's plan.